At the height of the Cold War, the United States was spending billions of dollars trying to figure out what was inside Soviet fighter jets. Then one day, a man in a gray overcoat walked up to an American diplomat on a Moscow street and pressed a folded note into their hand. The CIA ignored it. He came back, they ignored him again. He came back a third time, a fourth. This man had access to some of the most classified military technology in the Soviet Union. Radar systems, stealth countermeasures, the blueprints for weapons that hadn't even been built yet. Over the next 6 years, he photographed thousands of secret documents and walked out of a locked Soviet facility with the film hidden against his skin every single day. American pilots who came home alive because of what he did. His name was Adolf Tolkachev. The KGB never knew he existed until the day someone inside the CIA told them. This is his story, the billion-dollar spy. Moscow, winter, 1977. The city is gray. The streets are frozen solid. The kind of cold that cuts right through a coat and settles into the bone before you even realize it's there. People move quickly on the pavement outside the American embassy. Head down, eyes forward. In Moscow, you don't linger near foreign embassies. You don't slow down. You don't look. But there is a man sitting in a parked car across the street who is not moving at all. He's been here before, more than once. He looks like 1,000 other Soviet men in their late 40s, glasses with thick frames, thinning hair combed neatly to one side, a gray overcoat that has seen better winters. There is nothing about him that would make anyone look twice. But if you looked closely, if you noticed the way his hands rest in his lap, the way his eyes track movement without ever moving his head, you would know that this man is not simply waiting for someone. He is waiting for the right moment. Hidden inside his coat, pressed flat against his chest, is a folded piece of paper. He has been carrying this note for weeks, walking the same streets, watching the same embassy, trying to find the right person, the right second, the right angle. The note is simple. It says he wants to meet with an American. It says he has something important to share. His name is Adolf Tolkachev. He is a senior engineer at one of the Soviet Union's most classified military research institutes, and what he is preparing to do on this frozen Moscow street, in this ordinary car, in this ordinary coat, will change the outcome of the Cold War. He sees his moment, an American diplomat walking toward their vehicle. Tolkachev gets out, walks over, reaches out, presses the note into the diplomat's hand. The diplomat doesn't stop, doesn't look at him, just keeps walking. The note reaches the CIA station inside the embassy, and the CIA does absolutely nothing with it. They file it as a probable provocation, a KGB trap, someone trying to bait an American diplomat into making contact with a stranger, which would be photographed, reported, and turned into an international incident. In Moscow, the CIA had a rule. You do not respond to unsolicited approaches. You assume they are setups. You move on. So, they ignored him. Tolkachev tried again. A different note. A different diplomat. Same result. A third approach. Ignored. A fourth. Ignored. He kept going. Month after month, through the winter and into the spring and through another winter, this quiet man in a gray coat kept finding ways to reach toward the Americans and kept being turned away. Most people would have stopped. Most people would have read the silence as an answer. Adolf Tolkachev was not most people. To understand why Tolkachev refused to stop, why he kept returning to that car window, that folded note, that frozen pavement, you have to understand what the Soviet Union had already done, to the people he loved. He was born in 1927 in the city of Akhtubinsk in what is now Kazakhstan. He grew up during the era of Joseph Stalin. And if you know nothing else about Stalin, know this: he was the most powerful man in one of the most powerful countries on earth, and he was afraid of everyone around him. That fear made him dangerous, in a way that is almost impossible to comprehend from the outside. Stalin's government ran what was known as the Great Purge. Between 1936 and 1938, hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens were arrested, sent to labor camps, or shot. Not because they had committed crimes, because someone had accused them, or because they were connected to someone who had been accused, or simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, in a country where belonging to the wrong party or knowing the wrong person or saying the wrong thing could end everything. Tolkachev's family was caught in that net. His mother-in-law, the mother of the woman he would marry, a woman named Natasha, had been a member of a socialist revolutionary party that Stalin had declared an enemy of the state. She was arrested. She was sent to the Gulag, the vast network of forced labor camps that stretched across Siberia and Central Asia. Brutal places designed to work people until they broke or died. She survived. She came back. But survival in Stalin's Soviet Union was not the end of the punishment. It was only the beginning of a different kind. For the rest of her life, she carried the official classification of repressed person. That label was not just a bureaucratic note in a file. It was a brand. It marked her, and through her, everyone connected to her as people who could not be fully trusted, who needed to be watched. Tolkachev married into that family. He saw what that label did. He watched a woman who had survived the camps carry the weight of them into every room she entered. He watched the Soviet system congratulate itself on its own justice, while the people around him lived under the permanent consequences of its injustice. Tolkachev was brilliant. He had a mind suited to precision, to the complex, layered technical problems that the Soviet military needed solved. He worked his way through university, through the ranks of Soviet engineering, until he landed at the NIIR, the Scientific Research Institute of Radio Engineering, based in Moscow. It was one of the most sensitive defense research institutes in the USSR. The work done inside those walls directly shaped the technology inside Soviet military aircraft. The radar systems, the electronic countermeasures, the avionics that determined whether Soviet jets could see the enemy, evade detection, and win in the air. Tolkachev had top-level security clearance. He moved through classified areas every working day. He saw documents that almost no one outside the Soviet military establishment was permitted to see. From the outside, he was the ideal Soviet engineer. Reliable, brilliant, trusted. Inside, something had been building for years. Not loud anger, not the kind of rage that makes a man say dangerous things at the dinner table. Something quieter and more durable than that. A cold, settled decision that the system which had done what it had done to his family, to his wife's mother, to Natasha, to the ordinary people around him who had paid for nothing, was not a system that deserved his loyalty, and that if he was ever given the chance, he was going to do something about it. At the CIA's Moscow station, a young case officer named John Gilsher was going through a stack of old contact reports that no one had acted on. He found the notes from Tolkachev. He read them carefully, read them again. Something about this one felt different. KGB provocations, the traps they set to catch American officers making unauthorized contacts, followed a pattern. They were designed to move fast, to get you to respond quickly before you thought too hard about it. This man had been trying for months. He hadn't made it dramatic. He hadn't offered spectacular intelligence or made wild claims designed to be irresistible. He had just kept showing up, passing notes, and disappearing. The persistence was strange. And in intelligence work, strange things deserved a second look. Gilsher brought it to the station. The station was still skeptical, and for good reason. Moscow was not like any other city in the world to operate in. The KGB's surveillance capability was extraordinary. They had watchers on every block near the embassy. They photographed American diplomats. They followed them on public transport. They had informants in hotels, in restaurants, in universities, in the workplaces where Soviet citizens might encounter foreigners. This was not paranoia. This was documented. Any unauthorized contact between an American officer and a Soviet citizen could blow the entire station's cover. It could expose every active operation. It could end careers, compromise assets, and hand the KGB a propaganda victory. The safest thing, the thing that every training manual and every experienced officer agreed on, was to say no. Gilsher pushed anyway. He argued the case carefully. He made the point about the persistence. He outlined what someone with genuine access to Soviet military avionics research could be worth. In early 1978, the CIA station authorized a response. Careful, minimal, non-committal. A CIA officer made brief contact with the man from the car window. His name, as he gave it plainly, was Adolf Tolkachev. He told them where he worked. He told them what he had access to. He told them what he was prepared to do. The CIA officer listening to him had to work hard to keep his expression neutral. What Tolkachev was describing, access to classified documents on Soviet radar systems, on electronic warfare, on the avionics inside every major Soviet military aircraft, was exactly the kind of intelligence the United States had spent billions of dollars trying to obtain through satellites, through spy planes, through entire covert programs for over a decade. They had spent billions of dollars trying to understand what was inside Soviet fighter jets. And here was a man who could read the schematics. The CIA brought in a senior officer, Gardner Gus Hathaway, to manage the case at the highest level. They gave Tolkachev a code name. First, CKSPHERE. Later, CKVEIL. Names that meant nothing to anyone who didn't already know. And they began one of the most extraordinary intelligence operations of the Cold War. Running an asset inside Moscow was a problem unlike any other in the intelligence world. In other cities, you had room to maneuver, you had cover, you could use safe houses, you could arrange meetings in restaurants or parks. In Moscow, you had none of that. You had a fishbowl. The KGB surveillance apparatus was so comprehensive, and the pressure on CIA officers operating under diplomatic cover was so intense that every meeting had to be engineered down to the second. The margin for error was essentially zero. And Tolkachev was given a Minox camera, a device about the size of 2 fingers pressed together, small enough to conceal in a closed fist. With it, he could photograph documents while sitting at his own desk. Every working day, he went into the classified sections of his institute, retrieved documents he was authorized to access, and photographed them. Page by page, diagram by diagram, technical specification by technical specification. Then, he replaced the documents exactly as he had found them, and walked out with the film hidden in his clothing. Think about what that required every single time. He had to move naturally. He could not look nervous. He could not rush. He had to interact with colleagues, respond to questions, go through the normal rituals of a working day, while knowing that hidden against his body was evidence. That would have him arrested and executed on the spot. His meetings with CIA handlers happened approximately once a month, sometimes less. The meetings were short, precisely choreographed. He would arrive at a location, make a brief physical exchange, passing the film, receiving new supplies, and be gone in less than a minute. The CIA gave him one-time pad encryption sheets for written communication in emergencies. They gave him a special shortwave radio system, codenamed Discus, which allowed him to receive encrypted CIA broadcasts that would sound to anyone listening like meaningless static. He received new Minox film, cash in Soviet rubles, occasionally items that had been specifically requested. The operation ran for 6 years. 6 years of film canisters. 6 years of dead drops. 6 years of standing in secure areas, photographing secrets, and walking out as if nothing had happened. 6 years in which Adolf Tolkachev never once broke. Let's stop here and talk about what was actually on that film, because this is where the story stops being about one man and becomes about something larger than any one person. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, the Soviet Union had been building a new generation of military aircraft. Not just faster planes or prettier planes, fundamentally more capable weapon systems. The MiG-23 Flogger, the MiG-25 Foxbat, later the Su-27 Flanker. These aircraft were built around radar and avionics technology that Western intelligence had seriously underestimated. At the core of the Soviet air combat doctrine was something called look-down, shoot-down capability. The ability to detect aircraft flying low to the ground below the radar horizon using terrain to hide and engage them from above. American pilots had, for years, trained to fly low and fast to avoid Soviet radar detection. It was a core part of their tactics in any scenario involving Soviet airspace. Tolkachev's documents revealed that the Soviets had solved this problem. Their radar systems could see low-flying aircraft far more effectively than American planners had believed. Those American tactics, the ones pilots had trained for, the ones that were supposed to keep them alive, were based on a false picture of Soviet capability. Tolkachev's documents corrected that picture. He handed over detailed technical specifications for Soviet radar systems, the frequencies they operated on, their detection ranges, their specific blind spots, the angles from which they could be confused or evaded. He handed over data on Soviet electronic countermeasures, the systems Soviet aircraft used to detect incoming missiles and evade American radar lock. With that information, American engineers could design countermeasures, tools specifically built to defeat, the tools designed to defeat them. He handed over classified development documents on systems still in the design phase, not yet built, not yet deployed, future Soviet technology, in American hands before it was even finished. The Pentagon used this intelligence to reshape American air combat strategy. They updated their electronic warfare systems. They redesigned countermeasures for American aircraft. They changed how pilots were trained, what routes they were taught to fly, what equipment they carried. One CIA assessment concluded that Tolkachev's intelligence had saved the United States an estimated several $billion in research and development costs alone, simply because instead of spending years and vast sums trying to reverse engineer Soviet capabilities, American engineers already knew what they were dealing with. That number, the billions, is what gave the operation its name in some intelligence circles. The billion-dollar spy. But the monetary figure, as large as it is, misses the deeper point. The real value was not in the money saved. The real value was in the lives protected. American pilots flying combat missions in Soviet-adjacent airspace, the pilots who would have been the first into any real conflict, were flying with accurate information about what they were facing. The aircraft they flew had countermeasures calibrated against real Soviet systems. Their tactics were built on a true picture of Soviet capability, not a guessed one. How many of them would have survived who otherwise would not have? That is a number no one can calculate precisely. But it is not zero. There is something about Adolf Tolkachev that surprises almost everyone who reads his case file carefully for the first time. He wasn't doing this for money. Not really, not in any meaningful sense. What Tolkachev actually asked for was something different, something personal, something small. He asked for music, Western rock music, the kind that was banned or nearly impossible to obtain in the Soviet Union. The Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd. He wanted cassette tapes, albums, the music of a world that was sealed off from him. He asked for books, literature that the Soviet censors had suppressed or declared ideologically dangerous, novels and essays that ordinary Soviet citizens could not legally read. He asked for specific medicines, prescriptions that were difficult to obtain in Moscow's state-run system. Not for himself in all cases, for people he cared about. And again, in meeting after meeting, in the notes he passed, and the words he spoke during those brief, careful exchanges, he asked about his son. His son, Oleg, was young, growing up in the Soviet system, going to Soviet schools, being shaped by Soviet institutions, in a country that Tolkachev had quietly come to regard as a lie. He wanted something better for Oleg, a real education, options, the possibility of a life not defined by the same walls that had closed in on his wife's family. He asked the CIA if they could do anything to help. The CIA tried. They explored options, worked through back channels, considered what might be possible. But the Soviet system did not give up its people easily. Tolkachev kept asking. Anyway, what these requests reveal, music, books, medicine, a future for his son, is everything important about who this man was and why he did what he did. He was not a man driven by grand ideology. He was not trying to win an abstract argument about economic systems or political philosophy. He was a man whose family had been hurt by a specific system in specific ways at a specific moment in history. And the thing he wanted in return for the risks he was taking, for 6 years of photographing secrets, 6 years of walking out of secure areas with film against his skin, 6 years of living with death as a constant companion, was music, books, a medicine prescription, a chance for his son. These are not the requests of a powerful man. They are the requests of a man who knows exactly what power looks like from the outside and who has decided to spend his one secret weapon on the things that actually matter to him. In 1983, the CIA was preparing to assign a new case officer to the Moscow station. His name was Edward Lee Howard. Howard had been through the full CIA training program. He was intelligent, motivated, and had been specifically selected and prepared for Moscow operations. He knew the protocols. He knew the networks. He knew the assets. He knew about Tolkachev. Before Howard could deploy, the CIA ran a routine polygraph examination. The results raised concerns. Questions about his behavior, his finances, certain personal issues that hadn't surfaced during his initial vetting. In 1983, Howard was dismissed from the CIA before he ever set foot inside the Moscow station as an operational officer. The agency considered the matter closed. It was not closed. Edward Lee Howard was angry, bitter, And he had knowledge, detailed operational knowledge of CIA methods and assets in the Soviet Union. It was extraordinarily valuable to the other side. In 1984, he made contact with the KGB. What he told them is not entirely certain, even now. But Howard knew the broad shape of CIA operations in Moscow. He knew enough to give the KGB directions to look more carefully in certain areas. After Howard's contact with the KGB, the Soviet intelligence service began looking more carefully at their own institutions. The net around Tolkachev began to move. But Howard was not the end of it. There was someone else, someone inside the CIA itself, with far more detailed access, someone who had spent his career in counterintelligence hunting the very kind of person he had secretly become. His name was Aldrich Ames. Ames was a senior CIA officer, a counterintelligence analyst with decades of experience. He knew the full scope of American intelligence operations against the Soviet Union. He had read the files. He had access to the names. He was also in serious financial trouble. He had debts he couldn't manage on a government salary. He wanted a different kind of life, a more expensive one. In April 1985, Ames walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. He carried with him a package. Inside that package were the true identities of CIA assets operating inside the Soviet Union. He handed it over in exchange for $50,000 in cash. Tolkachev's name was in that package. So were the names of dozens of others. Soviet citizens who had risked their lives providing information to the United States. Many of them would be arrested. Many of them would be executed. Ames would go on betraying sources for 9 more years. He would receive more than $4 million from Soviet and Russian intelligence before he was caught. He would continue to work at the CIA, attending briefings, reading files, reporting on the hunt for moles, while being the mole. He was not caught until 1994, but in the spring of 1985, the damage was done. The KGB had a name, Adolf Tolkachev. Moscow, June 1985. Tolkachev had a scheduled meeting with his CIA contact. He did not know that the KGB had been watching him for weeks, carefully, patiently, in the methodical way that Soviet intelligence services worked when they were certain of their target and wanted to be certain of their case. He did not know that the meeting point had been identified, that officers were already positioned. He walked to the meeting. The KGB moved in. There was no chase, no dramatic struggle in the street. These things in real life do not end the way films pretend they do. They end fast, and then they're over. Tolkachev was arrested in a Moscow street in June 1985. He was taken to Lefortovo prison, the KGB's interrogation facility, a gray, deliberately silent building in central Moscow. The kind of place designed to make a person feel that the world outside has simply ceased to exist. He confessed he had little practical choice. The KGB had the evidence. They had the name from Ames. They had likely traced the physical evidence of his work. He was interrogated for months, tried in a Soviet military tribunal. Soviet espionage trials were not designed to determine guilt. They were designed to confirm it, formally, on the record, in front of the institutions that needed to register the verdict. The verdict was guilty. The sentence was death. On October 22, 1986, Adolf Tolkachev was executed. He was 58 years old. His wife, Natasha, who had known, who had lived with the knowledge of what her husband was doing, who had kept the secret in a country where keeping a secret like that was its own daily act of tremendous courage, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. His son Oleg, the one Tolkachev had asked the CIA to protect, the one he had used some of his intelligence payments to try to give a future, he was left in a country that would always know what his father had done. In the aftermath, the CIA conducted a full review of the operation. They looked at how Tolkachev had been handled. What could have been done differently? Where the vulnerabilities were. How a man as experienced and senior as Aldrich Ames had been able to operate as a Soviet agent for nearly a decade without being identified. The answers that review produced were not comfortable ones. Edward Lee Howard fled to the Soviet Union before the FBI could close in on him. He lived in Moscow until 2002, when he died in what was reported as a fall at his home. He was 52 years old. Aldrich Ames was finally arrested in February 1994. He pleaded guilty to espionage. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is still alive, still in federal prison. But none of that undoes what was done. None of it restores what was lost. What the CIA was left with, after all of it, was the record of what Tolkachev had given them. More than 5,000 pages of classified Soviet military documentation, technical drawings, design specifications, development plans for weapon systems that the Soviet Union was still in the process of building, intelligence that had been directly translated into American military capability, into updated electronic warfare systems on American aircraft, into training programs that changed how pilots flew and what they expected to face, into countermeasures that were calibrated against real Soviet radar frequencies rather than estimated ones. The CIA's formal assessment concluded that Tolkachev was one of the most valuable human intelligence sources in the history of the agency. Not one of the most valuable during the Cold War. One of the most valuable ever. And the cost of that intelligence, what it cost the person who provided it, was everything. Tolkachev never received the recognition given to decorated intelligence officers. He never received a formal medal from the country whose military he had reshaped. He never got to leave Moscow. He never got to hear from the American pilots who flew safer missions because of what he had documented. He never got to know that the technology gap he had helped close, the one that would have cost American lives if left unclosed, had been closed. What he got was a camera the size of 2 fingers. A series of folded notes pressed into strangers' hands on frozen streets. 6 years of photographing secrets in a locked office. And a bullet. The CIA did, eventually, name an internal award after him. Within the agency, his name is known. His contribution is remembered. There is institutional recognition for what he did and what it cost. But awards don't reach the dead. There is one more thing that needs to be said. Every historian, every intelligence scholar, every former CIA officer who knew Tolkachev personally and has written or spoken about this case arrives at the same conclusion about why he did it. It wasn't money. The money was real. But it wasn't the reason. It wasn't ideology in the simple sense. He wasn't trying to bring down communism as an abstract political system. He didn't write manifestos. He didn't try to organize anyone. It was personal, specific. It was what they had done to his wife's mother. The label, repressed person, that had followed her and then followed the family for decades after. The walls that had closed in around ordinary people who had done nothing except be accused by a system that fed on accusation. He had watched that. He had lived inside it. And at some point, we don't know exactly when, we can only see the result. He had made a decision that was quiet and permanent and total. The system that had done those things was not a system he owed anything to. And if he was in a position to hurt it, he was going to hurt it as much as he possibly could. Not loudly, not publicly, not with protests or speeches or declarations. Silently, carefully, with a small camera and a steady hand, and the infinite patient willingness to return to that locked room and do it again. the billions of dollars that the Americans saved, the technology edge they gained, the pilots who came home because their aircraft had been equipped with countermeasures built on real intelligence. All of it traces back to a man who started with nothing but a folded note hidden inside a gray overcoat. And the courage, or the fury, to stand by a car window in the Moscow winter until someone finally took it. Adolf Tolkachev, engineer, father, husband, spy, executed by the state he had betrayed, the same state that had first betrayed him. His name does not appear in the history books most people were taught from. There is no famous film with his face on the poster. There are no public statues, but somewhere inside the classified archive of American military intelligence, his work still sits. In the design of countermeasure systems, in the technical briefings that shaped how a generation of pilots flew, in a classified archive that most people will never see. He is still there. This has been the dark record. History didn't make headlines out of the things that mattered most. The operations that changed the world ran in silence, in gray overcoats and frozen streets and locked offices where no one was watching. If you want to know those stories, the ones they didn't put in the newspapers, subscribe. Because there are more. There are always more.